this horrible, horrible war. I was lying on my bunk under the main trenches when the shell hit. Half of the ceiling collapsed in, and the other half was not looking too sturdy either. I was rather shaken by this, and as I ran up the stairway, which had somehow survived the blast, don't ask me how, it took me a moment to comprehend my surroundings. Dirty trenches, duck boards beneath my feet, and a near-constant smoke hanging above them both. I had managed to grab my .303 Enfield rifle, which I had been issued upon enlisting, my bayonet, and my knife, but all of my other things were buried under about 15 feet of dirt. "Sergeant Dawkins, sir," said a voice behind me in a broad Scottish accent. I turned around and saw Private McPherson standing at attention, a look of relief on his face. The boy was barely 19, and I suppose that I was somewhat of a hero to him. "Are you all right, sir?" "Better than my bunk is right now," I growled, rather annoyed. "What was that?" "Mortar, sir," replied McPherson. "We lost 2 privates in that blast, as well as Lieutenant Cobb, sir." That took me a moment to comprehend. Cobb had been my commanding officer and head of my brigade, meaning that I was now in command. "See if you can't salvage some of that bunker," I barked at McPherson, not taking to my new role as commander at all. As he scurried away to get some help, I looked at the no-man's land between the German trenches and the British ones. When I had first been shipped out here, it had been relatively intact, but now it was pockmarked with craters made by shells and grenades. Flocks of carrion feasted upon the odd rotting corpse from the many futile charges made by both sides. The sky above was a perpetual smoky gray, even though France was supposed to be sunny. Half a dozen men, overseen by McPherson, had begun to dig away at the collapsed dirt inside what was once a bunker, when suddenly they stopped. I tensed and listened, and sure enough, there it was, the sound that every soldier dreaded. The rhythmic pounding of a creeping barrage, behind which an advancing line of infantry would be waiting. I looked and saw, not 2 miles away, clouds of dirt being kicked up by the heavy shelling. "All right, call up the men and have them get ready for a fight," I bellowed at the group that was digging, and immediately they began to sound the alarm. Well, I thought, at least I have 5,000 men to help me. I began to fire my rifle as fast as I could at the ever-approaching barrage. Soon the crack of my rifle was joined by others, and then the staccato sound of machine gun fire. Then a shell landed right on our position, followed by 2 others, and the order around me was plunged into chaos. I must have blacked out, for when I awoke I found myself half buried in dirt, with my men running pell-mell toward me. "In the name of the Almighty, stand and fight," I said as German bullets whizzed around me, but none of them seemed to listen. "Yes, sir," said a Scottish-accented voice behind me. I turned around, surprised, and found McPherson, with about a score of others, all looking nervously at me for orders. I hesitated for a moment, thinking about Southwark where I was born, but then snapped out of it, drew my knife, and yelled, "Charge!" About then my combat training kicked in, and all I remember from the fight were my emotions. First fear, which was quickly replaced by anger, then replaced in turn by fury. And then it was over, and I began to come to my senses. The first thing I felt was an acute sense of thirst. I half fell, half sat against the trench wall, and croaked, "Water!" The McPherson knelt beside me and gave me his canteen. I gulped greedily, most of the water trickling down my chin. "Here, how's that now, Sergeant?" he said with a hint of concern. "I'm fine, thank you, Private," I mumbled in reply, as I stood up to look over the trench. The remaining broken and battered Germans were fleeing over the equally broken and battered no-man's land. I then turned my attention to the trenches themselves, hateful to look at as they were. They were strewn with British and German corpses, looking surprisingly the same, even though they were deadly enemies. What's the point of this war, I thought despondently, looking at the fleeing Germans? That was too easy. It's because the people who start them are too cowardly to come out and fight themselves. Why was I involved in it anyhow? Now there was the real problem. It was because my father, a fisherman by trade, had been too old to fight, so he had threatened to disown me if I didn't in his stead. My mother had, of course, let my father bully her into submission, for she had not wanted me to go, I being her only child. Good old Mum and Dad. I began to feel tired and irritable, so I shouted at McPherson, "Have you dug up that bunker yet?" "Yes, sir," he shouted back, "and I also transported your things to the side that didn't collapse, and stretched a tarpaulin over the open part." Good old McPherson, always on the job. I walked down the still-standing stairs, and collapsed on my cot. Perhaps a promotion would be in order for that outstanding man, I thought sleepily, but it could wait another couple of hours.